Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis. This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rodriguez through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porter says cheated!
We want to win. This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Odietis. I am Jeremiah O'Shan, and joining me today to help preview the FC Dallas playoff series is John Arnold of Get CONCACAF and also of the FC Dallas radio broadcast. Thank you for joining us, John.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm excited for the playoff series. You know, on decision day, FC Dallas wasn't sure if they would even make the playoffs. And then they were sort of looking at, are they going to be playing in the wild card game? Are they going to be playing LAFC? And, you know, with all respect, and this is not what the team is saying, this is what John Arnold is saying. I don't think the Sounders are the worst matchup. I think we're going to get a good series. And of course, if it is a good series, then only the fans win. Well, and one of the teams too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been an interesting end of season for FC Dallas. They are tied with the Sounders for the longest unbeaten streak going into the playoffs. But now I know that they won the season finale 4-1. I'm sure that raises the emotions, that makes things feel a lot better. But that's only the second win they've had during that 9-game unbeaten streak. What has the mood around Dallas been over these last few months? Has it been like, oh, we've got it all figured out? Or is it more, because it seems like on paper there's been some frustrating results in there.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say at all that it's been, we've got it all figured out. I think it's been a bit of a frustration. You know, some of it is with external factors, even the fact that, you know, FC Dallas had to play Philadelphia midweek in Philly in a rescheduled game because of Philly's success in Leagues Cup. That probably wasn't when FC Dallas wanted that game to take place. But yeah, this basically run of draws until that decision day victory over LA Galaxy, I think has caused frustration, most of which kind of came out after the previous week's game, that draw with the Colorado Rapids. Your listeners will probably know that the Rapids are not very good. They fired their coach. They came to Frisco. Now, again, an external factor, this time God or Mother Nature or whatever you believe, the weather caused this game to take place in another non-convenient time during the international break. FC didn't really lose anybody, but still kind of weird circumstances. But if they had won that game, they would have clinched the playoffs and had a chance to kind of assure themselves of this better seed that they ended up in anyway. But I think the frustration after that game was massive. Now, what we heard from manager Nico Estevez, from the players after that game, was that they needed to sort of let that frustration go because, you know, it only served so much. And the fact that they won that decision day game against the Galaxy and did it so convincingly, I think obviously has changed the mood and mentality of the team ahead of the playoff series, and I think added some belief because, you know, I think it was a lot of frustration as they kept putting up draw after draw after draw, and usually draws, you know, I think 3 or 4 of them were 1-1s and 1 or 2 were scoreless. So also draws where it wasn't looking, you know, it wasn't like, oh my goodness, we could have had them, but we bobbled a defensive play or gave up a penalty. No, it was, well, that's what you got. And so I think there was certainly a level of frustration there that FC Dallas hopes is lifted with that decision day result.
So the Sounders and Dallas have faced each other. This is the 6th time. It's kind of it feels like they are almost meeting every year when they're in the playoffs. and the last time they were both in it would have been, I think, at one point they would have played each other 6 straight years. The one hiccup was, I think it was Portland that beat Dallas in a playoff series. Otherwise, they would have played them again that year. But they've played twice this year, and they've both been 1-1. They were 1-1 in Seattle, where Bernard Kamungo got the goal, which was sort of the one chance that Dallas really had in that game. And then when it came back to Dallas more recently, Alex Roldan scored the equalizer. It was really a tale of two halves, where Dallas was the much better team in the first half and the Sounders seemed to be the better team in the second half. But how does Dallas feel like they match up with the Sounders? Does it feel like a rivalry game because of how many times they've met in the playoffs?
There's definitely a sense of familiarity, I think, especially when you consider how geographically far we actually are from each other. It's like a 4-hour flight. Every time I go up to Seattle, which I love, I'm like, man, it is far. It's a lot longer than you think. So I think obviously rivalry breeds, like typically FC Dallas hates Houston and Austin, and
right.
You guys hate Portland and Vancouver. And I think, I wouldn't call it a rivalry, but I would call it a series of interests. I think the Sounders' reputation around the league and winning the CONCACAF Champions League and those sorts of things also just make it a game that people circle. So for FCD, I think, when you look at those two games that you mentioned, there's a fair amount that can be taken from those. Those past meetings, I think in some ways have shown the strengths of FC Dallas and the weaknesses. A lot of times they're able to control where the game is being played, how many opportunities another team is getting, and making the most of their chances sometimes, especially on the road. They've been a surprisingly decent road team for MLS standards. We saw it in decision day when they went to LA, were not even remotely bothered by, now look, of course, an already eliminated LA, but it's still a road game. You still got to fly west. It's 2 time zones, and they came out like they were shot out of a cannon. So I think that when FC Dallas looks at this game, again, with respect for the Sounders, with an understanding of what the club is and what this current incarnation is. But at the same time, when you looked at the other potential matchups, again, this is not what the team is saying, but my impression is that this is probably the best matchup FC Dallas could have hoped for. If you promise me no one from St. Louis is listening, I'll say maybe St. Louis could have also been that, but then you have to go through the wild card game, right?
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I think, and that's, I joke, but I think FC Dallas can cope with St. Louis's style. They had a weird game against them in St. Louis that ended up with a red card and all these different factors that kind of conditioned the results. So I think that this is probably the best or second best matchup that FC Dallas could have found. And so I think, when they look at this series, they're not going to be frustrated and certainly not surprised because of how many times it seems like it ends up being FCD Sounders in the playoffs.
Yeah. And, I look at the playoff field as it being as wide open as I remember it ever being. Dallas, I think, St. Louis, clearly the number 1 seed, but I don't know that any team in the West is like freaking out about the prospect of playing them. The Sounders obviously beat them twice, and they were pretty much the better side in both of those. But like LAFC is clearly the most talented team, I think, in the West, but the results have not been there. Go ahead.
And that's where I think that like frustration of FC Dallas's draw streak and going into the playoffs maybe lower than they expected after what they were able to do last year in Nico Esteves' first year is I think like kind of could clear a little bit, right? The FC Dallas's team that to me does have some clear deficiencies, but they've been more inconsistencies than deficiencies. They have trouble creating a lot of attacking volume some games, but then some games they put up 7 chances and convert 2 or 3. Sometimes they've had trouble converting chances, but if Jesus Ferreira finds the back of the net, you feel like he's going to get 2 or 3 more. At times they've had, issues individually at the back, but they haven't really had that in a while. So it just seems like, well, and the other big thing is I think, central midfield has been sort of a circled spot, and they went out and Bari Raramendi, the former Real Sociedad and Real Madrid midfielder, who's really brought a level of, class and huge soccer IQ to the middle. So, the FC Dallas that kind of has frustrated could still be the team that shows up in the playoffs, but it's also a team that I think will give themselves every chance to get out of a very difficult tie against the Sounders.
Watson's Counter wants to thank everyone for their patience, but now the wait is over. Located at 6420 24th Avenue Northwest in Ballard, they've reopened in a brand new location with the same bomb-ass coffee and the same dumbass vibes. You can still expect their classics like the gochujang fried chicken sandwich and Fruity Pebbles French toast, alongside their new soft serve program and their world-class coffee. Make sure to follow them on Instagram for all the latest and greatest.
Well, one of the players who seems to have come on, especially recently, is I mentioned him earlier, but Bernard Kamungo, who is a Tanzanian refugee. Is that the right? Is that right? And he's playing for the U.S. youth national team setup.
Yes.
Tell his story. What is going on? He's got 6 goals.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
It does seem like that way.
So he Tanzanian refugee camp, moved and resettled in Abilene, Texas. I'm not sure what the Washington parallel would be, but it's about 2.5 hours west of Dallas-Fort Worth, the big city.
Yeah, so like a Yakima.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, and even like I went to school at Texas Tech. So like Lubbock and Pullman, I think we always have a little bit of, it's similar vibes, kind of a cow town with all love to Lubbock and Pullman, like a college town. Abilene is halfway in between those two places. Not, much culturally going on, and certainly not what you would expect to be a soccer hotbed. And maybe it wasn't, because Bernard Kamungo was playing for his high school team, not for any sort of select club or pro team or any sort of academy system. His brother encouraged him and drove him to a open tryout, come all, to North Texas, FC Dallas's, Tacoma Defiance, parallel.
Yeah.
And the coaches were blown away, and they said, you gotta join, you gotta be on the team. So he came into the MLS Next Pro system, very raw, but a very good player. I had the privilege of being able to go to his citizenship ceremony, which makes him eligible for the U.S. So he's U.S. eligible, played for the U23s in a couple games recently, and played well.
Scored, didn't he?
Set up a couple goals, set up 2 goals. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I guess. He said one of them was to Obed Vargas.
Yeah. So just a player who is willing, one of my broadcast partners, Steve Davis, said he's too young to know that he shouldn't be trying some of the things that he's trying. Uh-huh. And that's true. I think that he's absolutely sometimes seeing things in a smart way, making a good run, getting in behind with his speed, but sometimes he does something and you're like, well, I don't know how that came off, but it did, right? And so I think that, he's a player who's going to keep growing, keep improving, and it's been a lot of fun to watch him come through the ranks because of his story. Did pick up an ankle injury against the Galaxy on decision day after he scored 2 goals. So, his status, I think it's kind of interesting because even 2-3 months ago, I don't think his name would really have popped up during a conversation about what FC Dallas is. And all of a sudden, it's sort of a problem if he's not able to start in this game, because I think he's a player that Nico Estevez and his coaching staff have found that despite his age, despite some things that are going to need polishing, is a player who can absolutely make a difference, and a really, really cool story, really great guy when I've been able to speak with him. So, I know Sounders fans won't be rooting for him in this series, but it'll be tough to not root for him going forward.
Well, and we did used to have, there was once upon a time, we had a relationship with Tanzania that goes back to maybe 2011 or something. They had, I think it was Tanzania that had this big tourism ad that was in one of the ends.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a Tanzanian player that came and trialed with the Sounders, and it was kind of a big deal. And Tanzania is an interesting story because there's obviously a ton of soccer talent coming out of the continent of Africa, but where in the continent they come from is not evenly dispersed in any way. And Tanzania is not traditionally a hotspot of soccer talent.
No, absolutely. No, and I think that's the thing too, is, you say, like, look, a guy like Alphonso Davies has a sort of similar story where he, came out of a refugee situation, grew up, became a very good soccer player, came into an MLS academy, goes abroad, and we all know who he is now, obviously. But as remarkable as that story is, comes from soccer hotbed places in a way.
Yes.
Now Canada's still getting to that status.
No, but isn't he a Ghanaian?
Yeah, and then came up in the Edmonton area, which maybe that's the Abilene, Texas of Canada. But yeah, really remarkable story, really
Yeah.
good guy, and I think beyond the good story, we're starting to see exactly why the coaches are so blown away, why these great things are happening for this kid, because beyond just being a good guy who deserves it, his talent's there too.
And one of the other players who seems capable of really raising the level of Dallas is Ellen Velasco, who I don't know where you fall on this, but it seems like one week it's an example of what happens when MLS teams are willing to spend big money to bring in young talent, and then the next week it's a tale of, see, this is what happens sometimes when you spend a bunch of money. Where is he right now? I know he was called up to the Argentinian national team. It didn't necessarily feel like a fully, like a
senior
full call up.
No, yeah. So just to add some context to that, he was called up to the full team, but Scaloni is doing kind of half and half camps to get Javier Mascherano's team ready for Olympic qualifying and then the Olympics. Velasco is in the picture for that in part because of what he did in a game against Lionel Messi and Inter Miami at the Leagues Cup, where FC Dallas probably should have won that game, lost on a penalty shootout. Velasco scores a great goal. He's an inconsistent player right now. If he becomes a consistent player, he'll be well. And what came to my mind was Thiago Almada, right? Which is like,
yeah.
So to point out like that he has become a consistent player, and he's going to go to Europe for a lot of money and play for a very big and important team and be a star. Velasco has the capability to do that. He has not shown that he can do that week in, week out. So in a series like this against the Sounders, he's a guy to watch. He's always a danger man, but there are games where he comes off the field and you say he's absolutely the man of the match today. And there are games where he comes off the field and you say he might have been the 10th or 11th best player on the field today. The thing that I think is frustrating for FCD and its coaching staff is it's not clear when or why. His attitude is very good. He doesn't seem to be one of these prima donnas who, he's not training hard enough, or he doesn't put in the effort, or, he only raises his game for the big games, and that's why he, excels against Messi, but maybe not against, in a random league game against
the Rapids.
MLS Team X, the Rapids. Exactly. And that's the kind of game where you needed him to excel. And he did, or free kick, everything's good. But like, I think the other thing with Velasco that does maybe frustrate the coaching staff, but also can be a benefit, is he came and they started playing him as a winger. Then he moved. When he was with Independiente, he played as a 10 and as a winger. He started his MLS life as a winger. Then they moved him inside to a more interior role as kind of an 8, a two-way midfield player. At times, he has had almost a 10 creative free role. He does really defend well for an attacking star. So I don't think that they want to get that out of him necessarily, but there are times where I wonder if he is doing too much defensively and should actually be pushing a little higher. You could say the same about Jesus Ferreira. So I think those are kind of the things with Velasco that have been frustrating for FC Dallas fans, for the coaching staff, even for the player himself, because, truly one week he looks absolutely deserving of the top 23 under 23, number one ranking that he got.
Right.
And then there's weeks where you're just like, I don't see it with this guy. So that's his challenge, is to become a consistent player. Now, I would argue that he has performed his best in big games and big occasions. The playoffs are a big occasion. He performed last year in the playoffs. So I think my money would be on him to have it together for these two games. But some of that depends on where is he being played, what's the role he's being asked, and what are the players around him giving him as well. And obviously, what are the Sounders doing to try and stop him? Because I do think he's a player where maybe the frustration is not like a young player where, they're visibly frustrated and they're going to stop trying things. But I do think it can get in his head a little bit. And if he says, this is going to be one of those games, maybe he's in that place where the Sounders could lock him down and cause him to not be a factor in the series. But I would bet that he'll do something in this series, because I do think he plays his best when something big is on the line.
Well, John, I know you have a heart out, but I do want to give you a chance to promote your newsletter. It is one of the best resources for following CONCACAF, everything in CONCACAF soccer, other than the United States, maybe, although you do get into the United States. But if you are at all interested in what's going on in the world of CONCACAF, this is the newsletter for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like the U.S. is well covered. I try and poke in when I have something to say that's a little different, but for the most part, like, hey, y'all got this. I'm going to go tell you a story about St. Martin, the French territory that's getting promoted from CONCACAF Nations League, League C. How did they do it? How did that happen? Different stories about players and coaches from the region that just need to be told, and I want to tell. And so, yeah, the newsletter is called Getting CONCACAF. I always say, if you understand the joke, then it's the newsletter for you. Got the free tier, got the paid tier. It's $5 a month or $50 a year. For every Monday, there's a premium edition with a roundup of news around the region, Mexico specific coverage, especially Liga MX, which is really helpful, I think, during Leagues Cup and the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And yeah, I love it. It's what I like to do. It's my favorite stories, and hopefully people will think it's interesting too. You can go to getconcacaf.substack.com or just Google Getting CONCACAF. I always say, similar to CONCACAF, I just had to make it a little too complicated to find. Maybe one day I'll do the custom domain thing. I actually was looking at the custom domains the other day. If listeners want to tweet or email in, I can get concacaf.news. I can get concacaf.expert. I can get concacaf.wtf. But I'm not sure what
I like
the best,
that.
I don't know what the best ending is.
CONCACAF soccer. I know some big proponents of the .soccer domain.
Oh yeah, that one might not be available because I didn't see it on my list. But
okay.
I'll pull it up and see what I find.
Okay. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to getting to know FC Dallas really well over the next 3 weeks. It is surreal to think that we are going to be doing this for 3 weeks in a row, potentially. Yeah. But hey, I guess that's the new world of MLS.
I spoke with a player today who he made it seem that he was informed of the playoff format after the regular season. And he said, it's weird, but it's interesting. And I was like, yeah, that's about right.
This is about right.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, at least you hopefully don't have players who at the end of game 2 will be celebrating, assuming that they've won when in fact it's got another game. But
right. It's on the coaching staff to make sure that doesn't happen. But if it does, we will laugh about it for sure.
Right, absolutely. It would be a very CONCACAF moment, I suppose, if that would happen. But John, thank you so much for doing this. I am Jeremiah Shan signing off for Nos Audietes. We will catch you next time.
Let's win another one!